Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Welcome to those online, watching on TV, and here in person. Why don't we start with the roll call of the City Council?
Council members Brecky.
Here.
Erickson.
Here.
Jensen. Kiley.
Here.
Jensen's here. Kiley. Neitzert.
Here.
Selberg. Sale.
Here.
Starr.
Here.
Okay, it sounds like we have everyone present and accounted for. Councilors Jensen and Brecky on the phone. First up is committee and commission reports. Metro Management Council, Councilmember Kiley.
Yes, the Metro Management Council met this past Wednesday, April 8th. We took the directors, listened to the director's report, and then much of this was centered around financials. So there was a presentation of financial statements for the month of December 2020, and then financial statements for months of January to March of 2021. Then we accepted the final audited financial report for 2020. All looked good. And then we had a presentation of the 2022 budget, which resulted in a lot of good discussion, a lot of good questions based on their proposal. And we did not finalize that at that point in time. We will do so, hopefully we'll do so at our next meeting on April 28th. And that's basically it.
Okay, thank you. Just out of curiosity, are these meetings having updates on the Public Safety Facility Center?
Other than they're still in the design phase of it, and they're hoping to break ground this fall at some point.
Okay.
Very good question. I was going to include that in my report.
Yeah, I think they might be getting closer to like schematic design and the details. And okay. Yes, Councilor Erickson.
One of the things I'll add on there, and I don't have my notes in front of me, so Councilor Kiley, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a grant that the Metro PSAP, Metro 911 PSAP here in Sioux Falls will be receiving from the state. Was it just over $1 million? Yes. I believe it was a sizable grant of over $1 million from the state that will be coming to Metro, and so they've identified some uses, and that will be a part of the budget coming forward as well. But the fact that they were awarded this grant is a big deal. Some new technology that they'll get, and then potentially adding new staff as the city continues to grow. So that's it.
Director McMahon continues to display and prove his value to Metro. This is something that he took it upon himself to apply for, and it turned out great. So thanks for that too. That was in the director's report.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Next up, Siouxland Heritage Museum Board. Councilor Starr?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was unable to attend the meeting, so this will probably be my briefest report ever. So.
Okay, very good. That will bring us on to council remarks. Anyone with council remarks today? Councilor Erickson.
Sorry, it's Metro 911 Appreciation Week. So if you can send a note of appreciation for all the work they did. The mayor and I stopped by this morning, and they've had a lot of other visitors. Truly just thanking them for their service. We got to witness them taking some calls, and truly, if you've never seen multitasking, that is the prime example of what multitasking means. So we're super grateful for them. They are really the backbone of any time you need a call for service. So it was nice to kind of walk through there and just say thank you.
Great words. Okay, next up is presentations. First is 2020 financial results, and that's presented by Director of Finance, Sean Pritchett. Welcome.
Good afternoon, councilors. It's my pleasure to appear before you here this afternoon to talk about the 2020 financial report for this city of Sioux Falls. Those of you that participate on the audit committee, they were presented the end of year financial audit on March 29th. It was accepted by the audit committee, and so we are here before you presenting the audit report. We will be back again next week to present our first report for 2021, which will be the March financials. So We'll go ahead and just roll right into this. We will talk very briefly about a snapshot of the economy. This is 3 months ago, so we'll just cover some of the high points of this, and then we'll start digging in primarily into the general fund as the primary operating account for the city. But we'll also be talking briefly about the capital program, where things stand with the entertainment tax, the enterprise activities, and then as well as where we stand from a debt perspective for the city. So jumping in here, again, a primary portion of this presentation is going to cover the general fund here, but in terms of the economic standpoint, the Sioux Falls unemployment ended the year at 2.8%, and this was actually lower than the prior year, which was December 2019 at 3%. So you can see from that perspective, we returned to at least some semblance of normalcy in terms of employment for the city of Sioux Falls at that time. We, like the state of South Dakota, remain about 3% lower than the national rate of unemployment after having peaked in that April time period as a result of the pandemic. As you're aware from several media reports as well as conversations we've had with you as a council, permit values set a record last year. They exceeded the previous record of 2018 by $133 million. Commercial lagged for most of last year, again, probably attributable to the pandemic. However, it received a major boost at the end of the year as a result of the $200 million permit that resulted from the Amazon Fulfillment Center. Multifamily and single-family housing was significant last year, and that continues into this year as well, as we'll be discussing in next week. As far as sales taxes go, we did end the year at a negative 0.7% on a rolling 12-month basis. You can see that after dipping significantly in the early portions of the pandemic, it did improve quite a bit throughout the remainder of the year. However, it did remain negative in several months, but it is trending in the right direction, and as we'll discuss next week, has been positive throughout the first 3 months of 2021. As far as the entertainment tax overall, that was more significantly impacted. It has a smaller base in which it draws from, primarily entertainment and hospitality related industries, and from that perspective was much more impacted as a result of the pandemic. Ended the year down 13.6% overall. That's about $1.5 million less than we had originally anticipated or budgeted for the year. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about the entertainment tax here a little further in the presentation. So digging into the actual financials itself, of course, the general fund being the primary operating fund for the city is where we'll lay most of our focus here this afternoon, as this covers those primary operating activities for us. In order to talk about comparisons, the CARES Act funds that we received in the amount of $47.7 million last year were considerable, and they do have they will skew the numbers, and so in many of these slides you will see us showing the actual figures as they would be reported in the financial statements, but we will also remove the impact of those CARES Acts so you can see them on a more comparative basis to the original budget as well as previous budgets from previous years. So from that perspective, the original budget for 2020 projected $174 million in revenues. Actual revenues came in at $175.6 million, or about $1.2 million more than was originally budgeted. As we noted, sales taxes were down, but we did see some increases in other areas, and I'm going to discuss that in more detail in the next slide. In addition, we came in with lower expenses than originally projected. We had budgeted $178 million in expenses for the general fund, and final expenses came in at about $168 million, or approximately 94% of anticipated expenditures. Typically, we're usually in that 96% range with about a 3 to 4% turn back. Obviously, it was a little bit higher this year. Much of that is due to as a result of reducing expenses in preparation for potential revenue reductions that occurred. And again, we will talk about that in more detail as well. But you can see, if you remove the impact of the CARES Act, revenues over expenditures were about $8 million to the good. If you look at the general fund revenues, so most revenues for our operating account, the general fund, is derived from property taxes and from sales taxes, each representing about 39% of total revenues, and 12% of total revenues are derived from other sources such as licenses and permits, charges for services, grants, and intergovernmental support. Property taxes continued and remained very stable. They hit about 100% of our expectations for 2020. As you can see, for sales taxes, we were down about $1.3 million there. We had projected, again, 4% growth for the year. We had reduced those expectations going into the pandemic in the midsummer months to about a 0% growth rate for 2020, and that's what we budgeted on for 2021, and we came in just shy of that at about a negative 0.7%. Intergovernmental revenues, there you can see there came in 27 million higher than what we had originally anticipated. This is where the CARES Act money is flowing through. The reason why it's not more than $26 million, so you would expect it to be $40 million more than what we expected. But we have to keep in mind that we did budget for a portion of those CARES Act in the final budget for the year. So the $25.2 million that we utilized to pay down debt service was added to the budget in that year. And so that's the reason why it's up 27 million. The other thing that appears in this category is $2.4 million we received from FEMA. This related to the 2019 natural disasters that occurred. FEMA is a very complex reimbursement grant program, and so it took quite some time in order to bring those funds back into the city. Other areas where we saw significant increases, bank franchise taxes, which are not a significant portion of our budget. They were up 200%. Another area was investment revenue, which came in 200% over budgeted expectations, resulting in about $600,000 more than anticipated. That's a difficult one to project because of the amount of funds for our reserve fund that we hold in bonds that can waver or change significantly based on where interest rates are at for a given year or how those bonds are valued. On the flip side, for revenues, charges for goods and services came in 2.6 million below budget expectations. This decrease is a direct result of the COVID impacts, primarily in two departments, the health department and parks and recreation. So the health department charges were down by $1.7 million overall. Parks department charges were down $1.2 million overall. A lot of that can be related to either program registration fees or for pool passes because the pools were closed. So not unexpected that they would be down in terms of their overall charges. If you look at the expenditure side, as we turn to that, we came in $10.8 million below our final budget expectations. Overall, the highest amount came from highways and streets, which had savings of $2.5 million. This primarily relates to a couple of items. First and foremost, a mild winter that we experienced during both the spring and the winter months of last year. It's hard to gauge exactly, so we based on expectations for previous averages, but we had a fairly mild winter, and so as a result, we're able to achieve some savings in result of that. Parks and Recreation came in $2 million under budget. Again, this is a result of this is a result of seasonal and part-time hiring, which was deferred and delayed in 2020 as a result of the COVID pandemic and not opening the swimming pools. So there was significant savings as a result of that. We did increase our R&M budget or advance some of the R&M budget to take care of a few items while some of those pools and so forth were closed during that period. General government was down $1.6 million or under budget, and this is primarily related to keeping positions open. During a time period of 2020, we did not fill open positions as they became vacant in preparation for some of the financial impacts. They were filled as we went closer toward the end of the year and began filling some of those positions as we knew our revenues were rebounding significantly and we knew more about where we would stand financially as a city, but there were savings achieved there. Similarly for police, $1.5 million it was under budget, primarily related to less overtime or less events that were occurring during that time period, as well as just not having filled police positions. Planning and development was under budget by $1.5 million. $1 million of that is really a net zero because it's the lodging tax that passes through. That was clearly less as a result of the impacts in the hospitality industry, so it was a reduction of $1 million of revenue as well as $1 million of expenses. So as I noted overall, those total expenses for the year were down approximately $11 million below budget. So if you look at our general fund available balance, or what people might refer to as our reserves, if you include the CARES Act money, we ended the year at 42%. Now we have a policy of maintaining 25% policy threshold, but if you remove the CARES Act, so there's approximately $22 million of funds that we hadn't expended from the CARES Act receipts that we had received for eligible expenses that are currently part of that general fund reserve until they're obligated for other purposes, a topic that we'll be discussing in more detail tonight. But if you remove the impact of that, so to really see what's happening from an operating perspective, you can see that we did, just from an operations point of view, added just shy of $8 million to reserves, which would give us about a 35% available fund balance without the CARES Act impacts in there. So if you look at the history of our reserves over time, dating back to 2011, you can see with our 25% policy threshold, we are over that amount presently and has grown over the last year, being at 35%. Or an increase of that 7.9 million, but it will be drawn down somewhat, likely in 2021, having opened the new fire station. There'll be increased operating expenses related to the additional 15 personnel that are related to that site. Moving on to the capital program. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but we'll just give a quick overview of the expenditures made in 2020. So just shy of $150 million was spent on capital expenditures in 2020. Highways and streets represented the most significant portion of that at just shy of $66 million. Utilities were second with about a $52 million in investments. And then on the Parks and Recreation, Culture and Recreation side, it was approximately $10 million investment. The major projects that were completed in 2020 include the construction of the Kirby Dog Park at Fort Sod, reconstruction of 57th Street from Western to Minnesota Avenue, reconstruction of the 41st Street and Western Avenue interchange, 69th Street from Louise Avenue to Tallgrass Avenue, construction of Veterans Parkway from Rice Street to Interstate 90, and then the overlay of 207 blocks, 16 blocks of concrete rehab, 48 blocks of core neighborhood reconstruction, and 546 blocks of slurry seal in various locations throughout the city of Sioux Falls. If you look at our remaining balance for the sales and use tax fund, so again, this is our capital fund, you can see we began the year with a fund balance as of December 31st, or excuse me, January 1st of just shy of 61 million. Our fund balance on December 31st was 45 million. When you remove the restricted and committed amounts, as well as our $2.4 million reserve, which was increased last year at this time, we have a remaining balance of about $7.9 million. Now, you want to look at that figure a little bit carefully. Typically, we've come forward at this time of year and said, okay, we have 7.9 million that's available to obligate from additional projects. But the one item I do want to point you to is that item that's listed there, plus deferred revenues. So what that is essentially is those are accounts receivable due to the city from other entities. And this is significantly higher than what we typically would see at the end of the year. So this is usually less than $1 million, and now it's 9.3. So these are not funds that we hold in cash necessarily, and they are primarily due from the state of South Dakota. So with a number of state projects that we're working in collaboration with them on, we've taken a greater role in terms of acquisitions and so forth, and then we apply for reimbursement from the state. Because of the greater role we're taking in that, there is a delay in when we're getting reimbursed for those. And so we just have to be careful as we're looking at this fund from a cash flow perspective to not over obligate it, because those funds haven't been held in cash yet. Now, we have collected so far at least $0.4 million of those funds have been collected so far in 2021. But if this is something that's going to become reoccurring, we do have to look at the working capital of this fund. It lives and dies by the sales taxes we receive. We don't get them up front, we get them throughout the year, and so we don't want to see this fund turn upside down, particularly at the beginning of the year. The other thing that we do with this fund at the beginning of the year is we pre-fund all of our debt service for the full year. It's sent over to our trust bank at the beginning in January to pay the debt service that occurs in May and November during the year. And so we send out quite a bit of cash to that in the early part of the year. So we just have to be careful in looking at not turning this fund into a negative cash flow or having a negative cash balance. So one of the things we will be talking about with you in the next several months here is about the size of that reserve. And just to talk about that real briefly, I will say that that reserve that we established and increased last year did it in large part because of some of the interest earnings that we've had that aren't necessarily cash within this account also. But we increased it last year, but that was a lifesaver for us when we were trying to hold back projects and deciding what we could release, what we couldn't, depending on what revenues were coming in, what the expectations were. We always had a backstop. We always had a capacity, and that allowed us to release more projects than we probably would have otherwise, because we always knew we had something we could fall back on if things got really tight. But as we see more cash flow with this concerns or working capital with this particular fund, we will have some discussions with you about whether that reserve needs to be increased in order to help backstop that, as well as backstop some of the increased earnings that we've had. Because at some point, interest rates will go up, our value of our bonds will go down that we hold, even though they won't reduce in value because we hold them to maturity. We have to mark them down, and as a result, we will have to mark that off in this particular fund. So we need to hedge against that in those years as well. So it will be a discussion for another day, but I did want to highlight that for you as to why we are currently holding those funds and what that might look like going forward. The next topic is the entertainment tax, and as you're well aware, this is the fund of the city that got most hurt as a result of the pandemic. So nowhere is it more evident where we need adequate operating and capital reserves than it is in the entertainment tax. As we've discussed in the past, this tax is on discretionary spending, and it's much more volatile than the broad-based sales tax that we have. There's no way for us to feel the same pain points that many of our local businesses who generate this tax felt in the past year. But we did experience a significant drop of about 13.6% in the entertainment tax. This is the first major drop of this revenue source since the tax was enacted in 1992. The last pullback of this fund occurred in 2009. You'll see that a little bit highlighted there, where it pulled back about 1%. We don't expect that this tax will necessarily completely recover all the ground we lost in 2020, in 2021. But we do believe we will make some progress in that regard. So currently we're projecting 2021 to come in probably somewhere in the same level as 2018, 2022 to be somewhere probably in the level of 2019, as that industry and hospitality sector makes a slower recovery than the remainder of our economy here. This graph here, first I'll highlight the orange bars in this graphic, which highlights why we build up balances within the operating account of the events complex managed. So as we've talked about, the entertainment tax really looks at two things. It's the money we hold ourselves as a city, and that's shown in the blue line, and then there's the portion that's held by ASM Global as our third-party management agent for the event center complex. So all of the profits that they've generated over the last 5-6 years as they've been operating are vested in their accounts. Those accounts report on our financial statements. They are the city's funds ultimately. They're held as working capital and for operations of that facility. And you can see that has decreased significantly in 2020. And then you can see the projection, what the projection was for the 2021 budget. So it was at $5.2 million. It reduced down to 2.9. We had come back in a portion of last year and asked for a appropriation of $2.5 million for the losses that we expected because we knew they would flow through to our budget. It came in at 2.3, so very close to what we expected. Again, this has been a profit center generally for us. The previous year they had made almost $1.5 million. So as you can see, in 1 year we gave back our profits that we had from there in terms of 2018 and 2019, which reduces that down to that 2017 level in that account. We do not anticipate an immediate build back of that operating balance in 2021. We're optimistic that we'll either close or perhaps be close or break even for this year. The blue bars, again in that chart, those are the funds that are held by the city. Although our hope is to exceed budget projections and find budgetary savings in 2021, the available fund balance budgeted for year-end 2021 are insufficient to handle some of the capital improvement projects that we've been talking about, primarily the cornice and parapet replacement project that is currently under design and was anticipated to move forward with in 2022. We will be having further conversations with you because we've talked about transferring some funds into the entertainment tax to make sure we can shore it up, as well as to ensure that that project can move forward next year. We have, with the American Recovery Plan, for the first time, there's an opportunity to utilize a federal revenue source to make up for lost revenues. And this is the one fund where we actually had lost revenues of a significant amount that we could attribute toward that funding opportunity. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the conclusion of this presentation. We're still awaiting additional word and guidance from the Department of Treasury of what those funds will be utilized for. We expect that to occur hopefully before May 10th, which is what the last time we've heard we might have some availability for some additional guidance. We've obviously read the actual legislation itself, and there's only so much we can glean from that. A bulk of this will be driven with the real mechanics by that Treasury guidance. So we'll be looking forward to that, be coming back and having further conversations about how some of those funds can be utilized here in the future. But clearly, you can see having a surplus or a surplus within this fund was helpful for us in the last year, but if we're going to try to continue to make the investments that we need over the next several years, there's a high likelihood we need to be injecting some additional funds into this entertainment tax in the months to come. As far as the enterprise fund activities, to give a brief overview of that, this includes both the operating and capital needs of these self-supporting funds. The balances are reviewed with long-term operating and capital needs, funding with cash as available to support our major capital improvements. We work to build up cash in these various enterprises over time in order to address those various capital improvements. You will see here in terms of the available cash there at the bottom for each where they rested for each of the different enterprise utilities. Now, if you look at those closely, you might see that they don't exactly match our comprehensive annual financial report, and what the difference is we exclude restricted funds. So for example, we hold a little over $1 million in our trust account for our bondholders for the parking fund, and so those funds are not appearing on here. The same thing would be true for the water fund related to any sales tax obligated bonds that are repaid with the water fund. Other things that would be excluded would be things like post-closure. We hold a certain amount of funds in cash to cover the closure of the landfill. Those also are not included in that available cash balance. So this is truly available cash to be utilized toward capital projects and operations. The last topic here I'm going to cover is outstanding debt for the city. And again, there's a somewhat positive story to tell here. Interestingly, we ended the year with exactly the same amount of debt that we started the year with, which was exactly $289 million, which is fairly unique for us. And to think about this, we issued up to $50 million of bonds for the public safety training facility, yet didn't actually increase our total debt load for the city. And the reason for that is, for one, on the governmental side, we paid down $40 million of debt. That's both regular principal payments as well as the prepayment of over $31 million when we repaid and prepaid the 2009 A and B bonds. And then we had the new issuance of the public safety facility bonds. On the enterprise side, we paid down $16 million of debt and principal payments, and we drew $13.3 million for the water reclamation SRF loans that are supporting the water reclamation expansion. So again, we had an increase in $2.7 million on the governmental side, a decrease of $2.7 million in the enterprise, to end the year exactly the same as where we began. Here you can see the historical trend line for our outstanding debt. Since 2011, we've had a decrease of $22 million of debt since 2018, and we're about $110 million lower than where we were 7 years ago in 2012, and of course that's when we would have issued the bonds for the event center when that was constructed. The last thing, last couple items we'll look at here is just per capita debt, because this kind of trues it up to the size of our population and the growth of our city. And you can see because of population growth, our debt per capita actually goes down slightly in 2020 relative to previous years, and is the lowest point in this 10-11 year period that you see here. And then we'll also show what our per capita debt is, as we show you annually, relative to many of our peer communities in the upper Midwest. Most of this data has been updated for 2020. There's a couple, Lincoln, Rapid City, Grand Rapids, that don't have data available yet, so we're still using 2019 data as it's available, but we tend to stay about half the amount of debt of our nearest competitors, approximately, and significantly less than some of those other communities you see in front of you, including Fargo, Lincoln, Des Moines, and Sioux City, Iowa. So we're in a very good position from a debt perspective for the city as we try to balance the need to generate cash to be able to pay for projects as opposed to borrowing to meet those infrastructure investment needs. As far as the forward outlook, we will be back again next week and to discuss the March financials. We'll talk a lot more about how 2021 is gearing up. Certainly there has been and there will be a lot of discussion about various revenue opportunities, one-time revenue opportunities that we've had primarily from the federal government. We talked a lot about CARES Act last year, and we have those funds to discuss this evening, as well as additional meetings and discussions we'll have about those funds into the next several months. But then we're also awaiting further guidance on the American Rescue Plan. It's interesting, there's not a lot of guidance out there. We've been listening a lot with the National League of Cities to a lot of their webinars and informational updates that they're trying to provide to the cities, because this is the first time that the federal government has provided a direct appropriation to every single municipality in the nation, which has never occurred before. So the CARES Act flowed through the state. For us, we will receive our funding directly from the federal government, as will the counties as well. But interestingly, the National League of Cities put forward 5 guiding principles as to we utilizing these American Rescue Plan funds, and they do align much with what we've been discussing as we've looked at how these funds would be deployed. The first guiding principle they gave is to assess your government operations and community needs to develop a plan for recovery, understanding the situation of your community economically, as well as the businesses, nonprofits, and residents. I think that's an important point, because Sioux Falls is in a much different position than communities that you would see in different parts of the nation. The other thing is to understand those resources available and the funding opportunities. There is much more in the American Recovery Plan than just direct funding to municipalities. There is many different programs that are available out there, some of which are directed to cities as well. We have already received funding allocations for transit. We've been alerted to funding allocations for our home programs. We've received allocations for our health department, all of which we don't have a lot of information on, other than they've told us about how much we could expect to receive, and they're typically in the $1 to $3 million ranges. So, but those funds are adding up over time. So, and there is a number of programs that are directed to businesses, to households, to rental support, homeowner support, utilities support, closed venue funds, and specific programs for restaurants and lodging. And so as we look at how these funds will be deployed, basically what they're saying, and certainly we would agree with this, is we want to be cognizant of what those other opportunities are and utilizing our funds to fill in the gaps, which is what they've essentially said, is to make sure to use your revenues, their second guiding principle, use your revenues source strategically, link your needs to your funding opportunities, save these local government Recovery Act funds for gaps and priorities that are not eligible for other assistance programs. And so we are certainly keeping that in mind, even relative to the existing funds that we have, that we're able to maximize the deployment of these funds. And then under that, they also said make sure you're connecting with your state and county to align funding priorities. And I think that's going to be an important there. We've already had a meeting with staff at the county. We will have an additional meetings after we know more about what these funds can be used for. We would like to connect with the state in order to find out how they might be deploying their funds, because they've received about $1 billion in addition to what they've received previously. And we did fall a little bit on top of each other in certain areas as we rolled out different CARES Act programs. So we want to make sure we're aligning with them. We're not duplicating the efforts of one another. The third guiding principle they had was prioritizing fiscal stability and returning to work. So it makes a lot of sense, particularly for other communities. We've done that already with prepayment of debt with the CARES Act. We will do that, and we will request your assistance in approving funds for the entertainment tax that can be utilized with these ARP funds. So we'll take a look at that and trying to make sure we're shoring up our financials. But as you can see from our end of year financial statements, we are also in a fairly good position. And so we will have the opportunity to do other things and deploy them in for other investments for the community. Lastly, it's last two guiding principles were maintain records and document your impact. Much of that is very obvious for us, that we want to be able to maintain those records and then communicate, leveraging our congressional delegation to be part of our success. But I think expanding upon that, communicating with our community, with our counselors, with everyone about how these funds can be utilized, and we'll be making a difference in our community over the next several years. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you have in regard to our 2020 financials.
Thank you, Director. Let's open it up. Councillor Kiley.
One I'm going to eliminate because you're going to address the quarter of budget next week, so I'll hold off on that question. regarding the general fund available fund balance, so even without the CARES Act money, we're 10% above our target. So we're at 35.3%, and our target is 25%, having 25% balance available. And then with the CARES Act, it's 41.8. I think I'm interpreting that correctly.
That's fair, yep.
Obviously, the CARES Act, we are going to be using and applying that funding here in the near future, some this evening. You know, I've often said that I love the fact that councils before us had established this in order that we have to hit that target of 25% balance so that we're not spending down and then not having enough to meet our basic needs. But I've also always advocated for not going well above that because it is, after all, it is taxpayers' money, and they would prefer that count something like point in time, you know, we're in one of those rainy day situations where it's still very unpredictable what the environment, the economic environment is going to be because of the unknown with the pandemic. Do you see maybe applying more of that balance, maybe in 2022 to get that closer down, or maybe even 23 after I'm gone, to get that closer down to our target point of 25%?
So I think we've got to keep this discussion point in mind when we talk about a broader discussion point about ARP funds and CARES Act funds, as well as our discussions going into the 2022 budget, because we always budget to a certain extent of utilizing some of our reserves, although we always know we give some back at the end of the year, right, 2 to 3%. But we're also looking at where do we hit that 25% threshold? Is it 5, 6, 7 years out? And if we spend it down, like how much, we back into how much is available to spend in the current year and what the projections look like for the future years. So all of that kind of occurs as part of the budgeting process, and we just have to be careful that when we hit that 25% threshold, which, you know, we're working on those budget projections right now, but if that's 6 or 7 years out, that we also have to see that we have growing budget and that 25% starts to turn around and go back up again. So I respect your comments in regard, we don't want that surplus to get too large because we're not deploying our financial resources in a way that maximizes their return for the community. So they will definitely be part of that broader discussion about all of the funds that will be available, as well as our budget 2022 discussions as well.
A lot of our schools around the state got themselves into that kind of a situation here a few years back, and as you recall, the legislature took action regarding this too. So I do think that it's great to have that reserve, but at the same time, we owe it to the citizens to utilize their tax dollars in ways that they expect us to. The entertainment tax collected, so again, if I'm reading the bar graphs correctly, 2020 actually just slightly exceeded tax collected in 2015. It's going back 4 years. While it was a decrease from 2019.
Yeah, so basically you're getting down to an amount of about 2015 where they lost. Yep.
Which, to me, considering what we've just gone through, I think that's still pretty amazing results that we were able to do that. What aspect of the entertainment tax do you think was helping driving and keeping that from just going flat? We know it wasn't hospitality.
What kept it from reducing down even further than what it ended at?
Right.
Well, if you think about the fact, 50% of that revenue is generated from restaurants. So that is going to be the number one source of that. The number two, I believe, is lodging. And so we know lodging has been about 20 to 30% lower. Restaurants has made a recovery. It hasn't quite normalized yet. We'll have to look at the numbers here for 2021 to see where they're at, but it looks like it's been fairly close to where we're getting back to 2019's numbers for restaurants. But to be honest with you, having an open economy and having the availability of those restaurants to be able to operate even during a pandemic made a major impact on the entertainment tax fund.
I agree. I mean, again, when I look at that, and you would expect that it would have just dropped like a rock, but it's actually better than our 2015 results, which to me in the last 5-year period, that's pretty decent. All right, the last is more of a comment on my part, and that's the per capita debt by city comparison. You know, I really think this, the credit goes to you and to your predecessor, Director Turbach, for managing our debt very well. When Councilor Erickson and I ran for office back in 2014, my opponent at that time kept pointing to Rapid City, our sister city, which I didn't realize we had a sister city in Rapid City. But anyway, she was comparing our debt to theirs. We are now less than 1/2 of what theirs was, where before it was just a few $100 difference. Rapid City a little bit better, but it's dropped to less than half of what Rapid City is currently. So, job well done. I like to see that. I'm not a believer in debt, but I mean, obviously you have to in order to progress and provide the things, just the basic needs people need. So anyway, nicely done.
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Just going off of the outstanding debt, for those last few slides, the slide 12 before included CARES Act funding. For our outstanding debt, is that including the CARES Act funding or was that excluded?
On which slide is this?
Well, slide 12 did both, included it and also took it out. So when we look at slide 22 through 25, does that include the CARES Act fund or not? Like, are we including the CARES Act money that we got, or did we do it without it?
The repayment, it would incorporate the fact that we utilized the $25 million to pay down that debt. So that it's just the end of year figure.
Okay.
Total debt. So yeah, it includes what we paid down from the CARES
Only
Act.
what we paid down, but we
Yes.
won't use.
Yep.
Doesn't go forward for what we did going forward. Okay, got you. The other question that I had is, as we talk about the CIP and having some of that funds available, hypothetically speaking, I know this is at the last minute, but just seeing these numbers today and then going into tonight, would it make more sense to use that CIP fund for an extra $4 million for infrastructure and for roads for Director Cotter's department? Because the CARES Act funding has so much more flexibility that the CIP money really is, you can only use it for this bucket of money. And so then if we have the CARES Act money, that can be used for just a slew of different things. I don't know if it makes sense or not, or if it's too late to consider that, but there's just so much more flexibility with the CARES Act money versus having the CIP fund balance at the end of the year and using that extra $4 million for that and roads.
The only restrictions you would be putting on it if you say you use that existing surplus balance, because we're sending it all over to the sales and use tax fund anyway. So the only restrictions it would, I guess, eliminate is if we were going to use it for more operating type expenditures, because it wouldn't be in the general fund anymore because we sent it over to the sales and use tax. So the pool will still be there. The 7.9 will still be there.
Right, the 7.9 will still be there. But what I'm saying is then that $4 million can be used elsewhere, because the 7.9 is the second penny. It's what we have to use for capital improvement projects versus, we could use it for mental health or anything else with the CARES Act. I know there's a lot of talk of housing and doing that as well. I know it's last minute, but it just was curious if that's something that we could use it at. But there's always a list of roads that need to be fixed, a mile long versus of my arm versus, just using it somewhere else.
And I would guess most of, it depends on where some of the resources are deployed. I'm going to guess a lot of them are still going to end up in the capital program anyway at some point. That the RRP money, even though we don't know exactly where we can take it into, it's likely it could potentially end up in the general fund too. So with the additional reserve balances and so forth, there's a potential to do it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate just having the year end and knowing where we're at. We've got a lot of decisions to make in the next few months as we talk about CARES funding and really the budget season. So thank you.
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I had a question on reserves, but Counselor Kiley did a nice job hitting on that subject. My other subject is probably just a little trivial. I mean, we always do such a nice job on our per capita debt. And again, I think Counselor Kiley mentioned that. I mean, it's always so impressive. My trivial question is, any idea on why Fargo's number is always so crazy? My mother lives up there. What's she been up to?
We were just talking about that, and I don't know. I don't know if some of it was flood control. I don't know. You know, since I've been here, theirs have always been extremely high. So I don't know if they're issuing some sort of, conduit debt, and they're issuing debt for other entities, and but they're assuming the liability for it. I don't know exactly why theirs are so high, but it's something we should probably look at.
Yeah, I know it's nothing. I just was curious. It's always like inflated quite a bit past the second to last, so just wondering how that was. But anyways, ours always looks impressive, and I wish I had another really good question, but that's about it. Thank you.
And to be fair, I think we have to expect that per capita number is going to go up a little bit. Obviously, over the next several years with the wastewater treatment plant expansion, we expect to be drawing down the funds as it goes to construction over the next several years. I mean, we'll be paying down debt overall, but we do expect enterprise debt to go up as a result of that expansion project. So,
Thanks for the presentation.
Sure. Any questions from the phones? Thanks. Not hearing any, we'll go to you, Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that comes off the top of my head that I guess I'm concerned that when the public hears us talking about money, we've spent the CARES Act money. We have a budget surplus. Would that be a better way of explaining it? Because the surplus came from the CARES Act money, but the CARES Act money has strings. The money we have now is a budget reserve that I think Councilor Erickson did a good job of explaining the difference that we can use it for operational or capital or however we do it. And I know that helps us keep it straight if we call it CARES Act money, but I don't want our legislators to be confused that that's how we're using CARES Act money, or that the public becomes confused that, hey, there were restrictions. It wasn't supposed to be spent for things that were already budgeted. It wasn't, but we've already used that for law enforcement, health, fire, and we've technically spent the CARES Act money already.
right, I think that's a good point, and it's very confusing because it's hard to talk about it without referring to it as CARES Act, because where did the money come from? But we received the money based on eligible expenses we already submitted. So we drew it down from the state based on eligible expenses we incurred in 2020. So you're correct in that now that it's in the general fund, it is part of our reserve balance and can be utilized as any other funds would be utilized. It has been utilized for the purposes because we already drew it against expenses from last year. Now it's just part of our reserve balance. Yep. So it is ultimately the most flexible dollars now.
Yep, and I don't want the public to become confused because I've already had people say, how can you use the CARES Act money for an ice ribbon, or how can you use the CARES Act money for anything else? And it's like trying to make that explanation and make the difference so that people understand that it's unencumbered at this point, maybe is a better way, or just like any other reserve that we have, the extra reserve money that we had from the 2020 budget, so.
And ultimately, we have paid for expenses we were planning to pay last year. So,
thank you.
I mean, ultimately, that's what occurred with the CARES Act, is we were able to make them eligible and got repaid. We didn't have the dip in revenues that other communities did in struggling to get through and paying their expenses. And then it becomes part of our general fund balance.
Perfect. All right, this one gets simpler or harder depending on how you want to look at it. At the end of the year, our accounts receivable with our partner organizations, I guess the one that came up this morning with a group of people with a new ownership group for the Canaries, are we up to date with payments with everyone? I know that one usually gets paid towards the end of the year and with the different ownership group. Is that one okay? Is there other groups that we have some outstanding debt with yet that we're still trying to work through?
So yes, we don't have any outstanding debt with the Canaries. They typically would pay at the end of the year, and they did change ownership groups, so I think that we should be clear on that. One of the issues we worked with them on last year was to not reimburse us for our ticket fees, which they are to do within 30 days of collecting them at the end of the year like they were previously. And They did make good on that commitment last year, and they paid them as they should have, and then they paid their rent payment at the end of the year at that time. So, and then that was, again, prior ownership, there is new ownership there. And based on my communications with them, had some confidence that they'll be good about making sure that we stay on top of these going forward. The one that I can think of that's still outstanding is the community theater receivable that we have with the event center, which has been paid down some over time. It's taken some time. We've relaxed some of the repayment on that during the pandemic. Obviously, they've experienced the same impacts that most of the event and performing arts groups do, but that still is held on the books, and we're continuing to work with them on reducing that.
There's a regular monthly payment, or how?
It has been a regular monthly payment. It was usually, that's managed by ASM Global as our third-party management agency, since they essentially hold the receivable. I think it's varied from anywhere from $500 to $1,500. They've reduced it down. Now they're working in discussions with them again to increase that as things kind of start to normalize.
They should plug their ears at this point. Is it time to start over fresh with them? From what I understand, their board's turned over. There isn't anyone there left that accumulated that debt. I mean, is it time to snip? I mean, because it's basically past rent, and it's, you know, through tough times, how do we get them to even and moving forward to provide that entertainment and to get back to their mission? Or, I mean, so is it owed us, or is it owed ASM? Do they manage? Is it they're just managing it?
It's owed to ASM,
Okay.
but ASM works on behalf of the city. So ultimately, the funds are due to the city since we're the owners of the account. And ultimately, it's part of our, the thing I would say about that is I worry about precedent that it sets. We have not written that down to that extent. What precedent did that set for other arts organizations in the community? I do have concerns about, you know, that this, you know, there's a history here when we acquired the Orpheum Theater too, that I won't go into, but there was a certain amount of as I understand it, some forgiveness that occurred at that time relative to the organization. And then lastly, there has been a number of grants that can be received by arts organizations to support them during this time period. I'm aware that they received a fairly significant grant and probably utilized that to pay off other things that they were behind on. As well. There may be more opportunities for that. So at this time, I don't know that it would be good precedent for us to release that, but we will continue to work with them. We don't charge interest. We don't charge any fees, late fees, none of that. It's just strictly attempting to get our principal back.
Perfect. Thank you. Councilor Kiley.
Real quick follow-up, because I know that we're tight for time this afternoon. Again, just to clarify with the reserves and how the CARES Act factors into that. Even without the CARES Act funding, we're 35% above our target. Once you add the CARES Act funding into that equation, we're at nearly 42% then.
Correct, and that's on both sides of the equation. So if you remove the CARES Act, we remove the cash that we received to calculate that. But we also removed the impact on the budget. Like, it added $25 million to our expenditure side because we appropriated that to pay off the debt, and it removes all on the revenue side as well. So reduces the size of the budget, and then you take that reserve amount and you apply that, and you get to the 35%.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I guess I'll just wrap up with, it's really amazing. I mean, you could make an argument in some ways we may be in the strongest financial position we've been in a decade, and this is after COVID. And that's really quite a testament to what's been done in the past and what's been done with your stewardship and responsibility. So it's really fabulous. Real quick, I don't remember the details, but if I remember right, and I'm not taking anything away from the amazing, the lack of debt load that we have. But, you know, obviously not every city is apples to apples. If I remember right, I think Fargo bonds as a municipality for subdivisions, and they build it all out, and then they do some sort of special assessment to recover it. So I think they're revolving and bonding a lot for stuff that we do. The developer does it here, so that might be part of it.
I believe that has to be because it seems like an unusually high amount for a municipality of their size.
Yeah.
There has to be something that related to something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, every year they're doing, I think, millions in just building streets and roads so that we don't build ourselves. So, anyway, I guess maybe the only thing was, okay, so in the general fund available balance, so is that essentially where we're keeping, so like if we appropriate this money, are we going to transfer it to the capital, to the sales tax fund, and then from there it would be appropriated and expended?
Correct. We would appropriate it as needed to transfer it. So we wouldn't transfer it early, but if there's a project that is going to be a sales and use tax related project, we'll appropriate it at that time. We'll cover that a little bit tonight as part of the ordinance. It'll be the same thing we did when we did the debt repayment. So we'll hold it in the general fund as long as necessary until it needs to be transferred. But that would have to be an act of appropriation.
Okay, and then obviously, let's continue discussing how to rebuild the balance in the entertainment tax. That maybe is for another day. And then to the point about the general fund balance, about the reserve, I think it would be good to just see kind of what your path is. And there's a lot of money moving in and out of here and skewing from all these funds and things, and to just kind of see what you show as a trajectory, because obviously you don't want to just spend down to 25%. Today, because you might be opening a new fire station in a year and you need to plan that that's going to draw down the balance, but to show kind of how you get back to not 40%, but 25, 30. So.
And to that point, I think maybe we need to maybe advance those conversations that we would typically do during a budget time, because we really look at those balances. We will need to cover that as part of this conversation we need to have about the additional funding too, because you got to look at everything holistically, and a lot of that will occur before we even get to budgeting. So I think that's a really good point. The last thing I would say is I just want to defer to the staff. I've been here for 2 years, and these type of financials and this type of stability doesn't occur in 2 years. It happens over several decades, and in large part because of the staff that we've had here for many, many years. And then also too, I think just a general Sioux Falls philosophy on how we manage our finances, which really drives down from the council decisions that are made in terms of policy and how we operate as a city. So I think this is many years in the making, and certainly this was an opportunity to highlight in a pandemic year the resiliency of our city to be able to navigate through it.
Yeah, and just to tag on that, I do tell people when they bring it up that they should, I have a lot of confidence, and they should, in our finance staff, that they bring us very responsible numbers, and they don't bring us, crazy things to do, and they a very conservative approach, and has kept us the ship has been righted. So, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Up next, downtown parking update. That's presented by Matt Nelson, our public parking facilities manager, and it looks like we have Dustin Powers coming up first, maybe. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Council. Dustin Powers with Planning and Development Services. Along with me today is Matt Nelson with the Public Parking Manager. So we'll tag team today's presentation. As you may recall from last fall, I was here and presented an update on downtown development that included kind of a look back at the past 20 years of development downtown and a look forward at our future opportunities that we have to continue to grow and prosper our downtown. One of those opportunities was related to the surface parking lots that the city manages in downtown Sioux Falls, and how we could redevelop those to promote density, walkability, and connectivity, as well as maintaining that public parking system. At that time, we were requested to bring back some data that looks and illustrates how we can effectively sell and redevelop public parking lots while still maintaining a parking supply in downtown Sioux Falls, and relate that information back to some of the studies that have been done in the past related to specifically the Walker parking study that's really been used to help guide some of the decisions related to parking in downtown Sioux Falls. So I wanted to provide just a little bit of a background. Walker Parking Consultants was retained by the city in 2014 to prepare a downtown parking demand and site planning study. The objective of that was to provide a kind of an independent analysis and evaluation of downtown parking conditions, and to provide options to help improve public access and support economic development initiatives in downtown Sioux Falls. Key aspects of that study was a current parking inventory in downtown, as well as what the parking demand would be based off projections of growth in our downtown. Those conclusions were based off not just the public parking supply downtown, but the private parking supply as well. The Walker Parking study was in conjunction with our efforts related to our 2025 downtown plan. That downtown plan consolidated information from a significant amount of public engagement. It also looked at projections of growth that were based off a market study that was completed by Progressive Urban Management Associates, as well as Arlen Land Use Economics, and then also taking into consideration, again, the results of the Walker Parking study. So again, the downtown plan used the results of both the market and the parking studies to set out goals related to development and parking in downtown Sioux Falls. The downtown plan discusses maintaining an effective public parking system, as well as identifying public surface parking lots for redevelopment as an opportunity to stimulate economic development, walkability, connectivity, and density downtown. So today, with that information and that kind of little background in mind, we wanted to provide you a status update of the current public parking system, a quick review of the Walker Parking study and what some of those numbers that were indicated in that study indicated, a look at the development that's occurred since 2014. So since the study was completed, to look at the development downtown, along with the parking that's been associated with those developments downtown, and look at really the next steps at the surface parking lots that we made available a few months ago. So I'll bring up Matt Nelson now. He'll talk about the first few of those topics, and then I'll come back up and finish the presentation.
Great, thanks. Welcome, Matt.
Matt Nelson, Public Parking Facilities Manager. So the intent of today is just to kind of give you an overview of where our system is and maybe what has changed since the last time we would have been here to present. And I know a lot of you have seen this slide or a very similar slide, but for those at home that have maybe not seen this or don't understand that we're an enterprise fund, we kind of want to review some basic information. So currently we sit at almost 3,000 off-street parking spots that are city-owned by the city public parking system. We've got about 1,100 on-street parking spaces that we manage. Since we added the new ramp, our net gain is approximately 425 parking spaces added to our system downtown. That's about 78% in parking ramps and about 22% in parking lots. Our goal is to create density and get more ramps than lots, just because they're a more efficient use of space, and we want to create an urban environment in our downtown. We are an enterprise fund, like parking, light, water, landfill, meaning we pay our own bills with fines and fees that we receive. The general funds do not support our fund. And to date, we have not received any even significant COVID relief funds in any form. We've had a few expenses that have gone up with all the other departments, but it's been very minor. It's actually just the 20-minute parking spots that we supported downtown with, which was probably under $1,000 to buy those signs. So it's very, very minimal. And we operate like a co-op. So all of the money we receive, it stays in our system, and we turn around and reinvest that money in our system. We reinvest it in our downtown in technology and staffing and facilities. The customers we support monthly, daily, and hourly or contract customers predominantly. And I think what's kind of unique to note is how our demographics of customers are changing over the years. You know, when the system first started 70 years ago, when we started parking meters downtown, it was mostly hourly shopping customers. Eventually, about 60 years ago, we'd actually built the river ramp to support more employee and visitor parking because the downtown was the core and our shopping center in Sioux Falls. As we saw the malls open up across the country, we lost a lot of our hourly customers and it became a little empty downtown. And then we saw businesses like banking and other retailers that were more of a full day employee type customers and our contract customers increase significantly. And in the last probably 5 years, we're actually starting to now see the increase in hourly customers coming again, and we're seeing a much better mixed use of our downtown. So we're seeing a good balance of contract or long-term customers and hourly paying customers, which is great because that's what we want to see in our downtown. And most importantly, I want everybody to know at home, supporting economic development has always been a long-term goal of our public parking system. Typically, that looks like the parking system buying or the city purchasing parking lots, and we turn, or it might be an old building, and we turn it into a parking lot, and we'll hold that for 5 to 20 years, and then eventually a development or something goes in there when the downtown is ready to go, or to grow. One of the most recent ones would be the City Center building. That was a parking lot for years that belonged to public parking, and actually all of our ramps are all pretty much tied to some development at some point in our downtown. So we continue to support that mission. So when we talk about available parking lots and why do we want to make them available, it's to create density in our downtown and create growth and create tax revenue. One of the big things we talk about is availability and adequate parking supply. And you can see here, this is as far back as the data as I have available, is what our occupancy rates look like. You'll see a few dips in there. You'll actually start with the first line, that's 1996. We were approximately 84%. We were actually coming off the building or adding capacity of a ramp at that time, and we slowly built up our occupancy. And then we built another ramp. You'll see it drop down to approximately 92%. That would have been the 8th and Dakota ramp. Stayed pretty steady. And then you'll see a drop in about 2009. That's actually was the addition of another parking ramp also, but it wasn't a public ramp. It was a private ramp. That was a CNA surety building that we used TIF funds to help build and add that facility. And then over about 8 years, which is pretty normal, we built the system back up, and then we added another facility. In 20, we opened our new ramp, and you saw a drop in our occupancy. So you're seeing in 20 and 21, two things happen. One, we increased our capacity, which we've done for years. And two, we had COVID, and COVID was a pretty big impact. So you're seeing both of those impacts hit our trends and our occupancy rates. But we do expect those to come back and continue to increase over the years. It's probably a 7 to 8 year trend is what we've historically seen, and I would expect us to see that at that location in our system over the next 7 to 8 years. So what are the COVID impacts? Well, the first impact we saw was on our short-term parking. Our hourly parking was shut off almost instantly. It started about mid-March. The months of April and May were brutal, as they were with most businesses. Our system downtown was running at about 10 to 15% capacity. Our pavilion ramp, which supports a lot of restaurants, and the pavilion facility itself, we saw 5% revenue compared to what we had seen the year before. To put that in perspective, the year before we would make approximately $5,000 in a month in hourly parking. That month we would have made $250 to $300. That's how drastic the change was. So it was pretty tough, but I'm happy to say it's slowly crept back, and as of right now, we're running about 85% with our metered parking on street, probably over 85%, which is good. It shows that we're coming back strong. And actually at the pavilion ramp, that at one point was at 5% of normal revenue, we're actually 200% of what we were last year, and we're 30% above what we were in 2019, which would have been pre-COVID. So we're seeing a huge increase in our activity downtown, and it's a huge comeback for our downtown. Long term, we also saw kind of a different impact. That came a little bit later, and we expect the recovery to come a little bit later also. Our net loss is about 12%. So we've actually, believe it or not, gained lease customers during COVID, but we've lost some larger tenants too as we've gone through this. But we are hearing from all of our businesses that they're planning to come back. So we're hearing June, July, we're having businesses coming in and asking, hey, we need 10, 15, 20 spots, and we're gonna start June 1st, or we're gonna start May 15th. So we're starting to accommodate that now, so we are anticipating by the end of the year, we should see most of the businesses that are coming back with their lease customers and back working downtown. And one of the things you commonly hear is, well, what about the businesses that are changing to work from home concepts? Well, we are hearing that. We talk to the businesses when they call, and we're seeing some of that. We'll say it's definitely a minority of the businesses. And we're also priced from a standpoint where they'll say, hey, we want a hybrid schedule. We want to work 2 to 3 days downtown, and we want to work from home 2 to 3 days, or 2 to 3 days a week. But the way we're priced, it's advantageous to most of our customers to actually buy a monthly lease than to pay for 3 days of parking a week. It's just a little cheaper that way, so we do anticipate the majority of those to come back. We might lose a small percentage, but we don't expect it to be significant. So overall, where are we sitting fiscally? We're still cash flowing from an operations perspective, and I don't want to dig too deep into the details. We do have our financial numbers for the year end, and they look good, and we feel like we're in a good position, but we do have the audit report coming up, or the financial modeling review, I should say, from iBailey of our system coming forward to the council on the 20th, and I think that's a great opportunity to dig deeper into any financial numbers and look at those, and you'll definitely have that opportunity to do that. So to the Walker study and what it says and what does it mean? Well, that study's getting pretty old. I mean, it's about 14, 15 years old now is when the last time it was updated. And some of the numbers and trends, though, are still pretty applicable to what we do on a daily basis. And so one of the questions is, well, should we update this? And I would say at this point, I don't think we need to. Although that is an older report, we've had multiple updates to different areas of the parking system from Walker Parking. We've had the Puma report done. We've had the downtown plan done, the 2025 plan. So we're continuously gathering and adding information to this. And I think the core concepts of the report, the mix of parking, it's still consistent with what it was when the report was created. So we can still use that as a guiding principle for where we're at with our parking and with our downtown. And generally, you'll say, like, well, where are we with our mix of parking? Well, the city of Sioux Falls owns about 25% of the off-street parking in downtown. There's another 10% of on-street parking that the city controls. There's about another 10% of when I say public, meaning public entity, federal or state government parking that is owned downtown. And it totals about 45% of that parking is some public entity owning it, and about 35% of the total parking the city of Sioux Falls has control over. The rest of it's private parking. It's 55%. And so what's important in those numbers? Well, I think there's one number that's been added to this equation that we don't account for very well, and it's mixed use parking or the partnership or public-private partnership parking. We've added the Washington Square parking, and there's an agreement with them to have public use on nights and weekends. There's the CNA Surety building that also has a use agreement for public use on the nights and weekends. So this is kind of the new category that's in there. So as we move forward, what parking looks like and how we add it, as recommended by the Walker or the Puma study, you've got to take all of that into the equation so we can account for that and when we look at it. And when we talk about guiding principles, well, what's important from a parking perspective? There's really probably 4 things that we typically look at, and they're still the same. The number one thing we look at, and this is really addressed in the Walker report, is adequate supply. We're in a position where we know we have pretty good supply right now. 7 to 8 years from now, we'll probably have a discussion on where we are again, and do we need to add more, or do we need to stay steady? The other thing is financial security. We've actually obviously had the IBLE report. We look at that on an annual basis, and it's kind of a measure of cost and value to our citizens, and it's also balanced against our level of service that we provide. So we continually look at that, and just know that's one of our guiding principles is that, yeah, we need to provide good financial security to our system, and we feel like we're in a good position for that right now. And then the last two, you kind of see more in the Puma or the 2025 downtown plans is, how do we create density and walkability downtown? That'll be a long-term goal for us. We'll continue to work on it through processes like we're going to talk about today. And then the last thing is, how do we create shared usage in our parking? That's one of the next steps that we always want to focus on. All that information, it's consistent with what comes out of all these reports, whether they're 10 years old, 15 years old, 2 years old. So we just want to make sure that we take all those into account, and that's part of what we're bringing these processes forward today. And with that, we'll have questions at the end for me, and I'm going to turn this over to Dustin to talk about surface lots.
All right, so a couple items that I wanted to hit on briefly here, just some of those assumptions that we've talked about with the Puma study as well as the Walker parking study. So these were some of the things that we talked about the last time we talked about the surface parking lots. And really the main driver to adding parking downtown is development. As development occurs, and what the studies are telling us is as that development occurs, you need the parking associated with it. So what the Walker parking study did is it took the numbers from the Puma market study, and the numbers that were provided in that was that we would add 190,000 square feet of commercial or retail space, and if we added 1 million square feet of office space in our downtown, we would need a certain amount of spaces to accommodate that growth. And what was identified is that that growth was projected over a 20-year time period too. So we were looking out to 2035 when we brought up these numbers. So what they said was that we would need 2,100 parking stalls to accommodate that growth. That's mainly long-term parking, which is about 2,100 of it, but it was short-term parking, which is more the visitor hourly parking that Matt discussed earlier. What we do know is that private development projects are incorporating their own parking on site to satisfy a majority of their needs as they bring these developments forward, thus really reducing the reliance on the public parking system to build parking specifically for private development. We do support those private developments when they continue to grow after they're developed, but when they come online, they're accommodating their parking needs. And so to illustrate that, we did look back basically at the developments that have occurred since 2014. Now, what I would say is this isn't every single development. There has been some remodels and renovations that really didn't have a major impact on parking net gain. So what we really wanted to look at was net gain of parking and net gain of where we are in accordance with the numbers that Puma projected as part of the market study. So since 2014, we identified 14 projects. They've added 582 residential units in downtown, roughly 300,000 square feet of office space, as well as 110,000 square feet of commercial. What I will say is that we have included Sioux Steel in this, and the reason we've done that is, one, we know it's coming online. Two, it has a lot of square footage and a lot of parking associated with it. And if we move forward with surface parking lots, we know that it's going to be kind of around the same time frame of when those developments are going to occur. So all this parking, all this square footage is kind of coming on at the same time. So we did want to include those in the numbers that we provided you. If we wanted to look a little bit more detail, what we've done is we've looked at those 14 projects. We looked at what the current parking was in 2014, after the development, what the new parking was based on what was added in terms of square footage, and what is the net gain or net loss of those. So I won't go into each one of those individually, but what we saw is that there was 3,100 parking stalls added to downtown based on those developments, which gave us a net gain of 2,061 spaces in downtown Sioux Falls. So really, this is a summary to kind of help illustrate what we looked at with projections. Column 2 shows those projections. We projected the 1,900 units in the Puma study, 190,000 square feet of commercial and retail space, and 1 million square feet of office. And to get there, we would need 2,100 parking spaces added to this overall system, both public and private. If we look at the actuals, you'll see the actuals in the column. Now, what I want to identify here is that the Walker parking study did not address housing units and the parking associated with housing in their study. And the reason for that is they indicated that they know housing is going to develop parking, because if you don't have parking, you can't really build housing units. So what they referenced in there is that basically they knew a 1-to-1 ratio for all units would be accommodated for. So what we've done to really amend and really update that net gain number, if you recall, we had a net gain of 2,061 spaces. We've basically taken residential out of that completely. So we've taken 600 spaces out of that for those 582 units, which actually gives us a net gain of the 1,460 spaces that are listed under the actual there. What we also did is we looked at the percentages, and the reason we look at the percentages is where are we? We're about 6-7 years in from the projections that were done, and we're looking out 20 years, so we're about a third of the way through. So where are we in terms of all of these numbers? What you'll see is housing units is about a third of the way there. Again, we're about a third of the way through the timeline that we're talking about. We actually have increased about 58% or achieved about 58% of the number of the commercial retail, and we're again about 30% of the office square footages that was recommended or proposed in the projections of both the Puma and the Walker study. So really what you see is where we're at with the net gain that was discussed based on the total square footage, and that we're about 69% of the way there. So we're about 2/3 of the way there with parking, while the uses that we've talked about and that were projected are a little bit further behind. So our net gain is really outpacing some of the projections that were provided through the Walker parking study. One other item I just wanted to bring up, and this isn't a big item as it relates to those numbers and the big numbers that we were talking about with long-term parking, but when we look at kind of the short-term parking, the city, along with developers, have done a number of projects in downtown that have increased on-street hourly parking for customers downtown. These have been accomplished through the Main Avenue Road Diet, the Dakota Avenue Road Diet that was part of the city center development, 4th Street project that was completed last year, and then the Cascade project, which again was city land that was sold. There was a tax increment finance district there, and part of that was to bring parking to the uptown area on street. And what that added, you can see the additional spaces. Basically, that's really just streetscape redesign is what's accommodated most of those, where we've changed parallel parking to angled parking. And so you can see we've had, based on those 4 projects alone, an addition of 172 on-street parking stalls over the last 6 years. So again, we presented the 2 surface parking lots that we have listed out on the city's website for redevelopment. When we looked at both of these sites, we were able to accommodate development while also accommodating the current public parking tenants that are associated with those lots, and looking at where they could be absorbed. So really when we looked at these sites is what sites are developable, what sites could be absorbed into our existing facilities. So we looked at our existing facilities. When we look at the First Avenue lot here, we know we have the Shrine lot a half block away to the south, and we know we have the First Avenue lot a block to the north. And so again, how can we accommodate the current customers and how can they be absorbed into our system? By making these sites available, we wanted to see a higher and better use. As Matt discussed, we want to increase the density downtown, and sometimes that means adding parking structures versus parking lots, and there's an evolution of that occurs over time. When we redevelop these, we will promote a more connected and walkable downtown, which is some of the goals that we've discussed. And really, when we talk about these surface lots and that we have throughout downtown, both public and private, they really create some barriers to pedestrian activity. And so redevelopment will encourage more of that connectivity. And ultimately, when we made both of these lots available, we did set out those goals. How can we create mixed-use developments that encourage density? How can we leverage our city property for economic development? How can we do that to increase density, not only to our site, but also adjacent sites? So whether that's associated with the projects that come forward, or knowing that once we develop some of our sites, that will have other sites in the area looking at redevelopment as well. How do we promote connectivity and walkability in the areas is a goal. And then how does this align with our goals and recommendations of the 2025 downtown plan? Again, we wanted, as part of that plan, to manage an effective public parking system, but we also wanted to identify and develop surface parking lots as we move forward. So based on our current surplus in our parking system, and the fact that we know that private development has done their part in building and accommodating the parking needs that are associated with the square footages that are being developed, we do think we are in a position to, again, move forward with redevelopment of a couple of these surface lots that we've identified. So we hope really, today's presentation provided you some more of that information regarding the status of our parking supply downtown. We do have strong interest in these sites. We've had several conversations with a number of developers, and we do have formal proposals submitted to the city for review. We would like to review those and move forward based on a selection based on the goals that were just talked about for each of those sites, and then ultimately bring forward a proposal or a project that could be considered at an informational in front of City Council. And then ultimately, again, our goal would be to bring a project or two forward for Council's consideration of surplus and redevelopment of the surface parking lots. So with that, we do appreciate your time today. Me and Matt are here to answer any questions on the information presented.
Okay, thank you, Dustin and Matt. Let's go to Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it's a great broad view. I have more specific questions towards those surface lots. What are the actual occupancy rates of just those surface lots? So tell me that broken down by each surface lot where we are, not as a holistic package, but what are the surface occupancy rates for those? And then on top of that, what lot is going to handle the loss of those spots?
Okay. I'll have
And then my
address
third
the
question as I'm going is, how are we advertising private lots, such as the Washington Square or some of the other public-private partnerships that we have relationships with, that I would say the vast majority of the public have no clue you can park in because they're private and there's no signage? So I'm just curious about those three things.
Okay. Well, I'll have Matt come up and talk about the occupancy rate of the lots. Like I said before, where we believe that where those spots will be absorbed, the Main Avenue lot, we have the Dakota Avenue lot just across the street, attached to City Center. That's where those basically 100 spots of that surface lot can be absorbed into. There's been a lot of fluctuation with that ramp. If you recall, when we first moved in at City Center, actually DocuTap or Expenditures employees a lot of them were in that ramp. But when we opened the new lot, there was a transition and a movement of parking individuals where a lot of First National Bank employees moved from Block 11 to the new ramp, which then opened up space in Block 11, which is connected to the DocuTap or the Expenditures, building. Yep. So a lot of those tenants were able to move from there, and which really has opened up a lot of the space back into the 8th and Dakota ramp. And then again, with the relocation of the First Avenue lot, there's about 50 stalls there that again, we have opportunity in the Shrine lot, half a block to the south, as well as opportunity in the First Avenue ramp. And again, that opened up spaces in First Avenue ramp, kind of opened up availability because of the new ramp being opened as well.
Okay, so since you're still there, I know last time you were here, we talked about the Public Parking Advisory Board. When was the last time you guys met?
I'll have Matt answer that question for you.
I know the answer, and it wasn't since last time that we've met and we asked
Correct.
You guys to sit down and meet with the Public Advisory Board. I don't know why we have advisory boards if we're not going to engage them and have them be a part of this process, even if it's a slam dunk deal and you think the council's going to support it. You've got to use those advisory boards. There's 7 people. I just was looking online. There's no agenda posted from December 3rd of 2019. The last agenda posted is November 5th. And I asked these exact same questions the last time we had this presentation, and it just frustrates me to no end that why have the board if we're not going to use it? Well, you don't need the board, don't use it.
Yeah, Matt can address the last time that the board met. I think from our perspective, we brought the information that was requested from the last informational meeting back to council so that you had that. Our intention is to bring this information forward to a future board meeting before we bring a proposal forward to the city council. So again, I'll turn those other questions over to Matt for response.
So I'll start with the board one. So during COVID, we had 3 terms expire. And to be quite honest, the parking board isn't the most popular board to join. We are typically, I'll tell you how it's worked since I've been here. We're typically going out and actively soliciting people to join this board. We typically do not get applications, and this is a board problem citywide. You're not getting 20 applicants for an open seat. And we had 3, plus we had 1 that was still advertised and open, so that kills our quorum right then. So without a quorum, we can't even meet. I'm happy to say that I literally got an application today that we were actively soliciting. It came in today, and it is going to the mayor's office this afternoon. That will give us the minimum met to meet a quorum, and other than that, if you know someone who would like to sit on the public parking board, we are actively asking for applications. The requirements for that are you have to be associated with our downtown by some means. That means you're an employee, an employer, a property owner, a renter. You have to have some tie to our downtown. So so I would love to get them. So if you have anyone you'd suggest, or we'll get them the applications and we'll work with them to get them on a board. As far as numbers go, the numbers for let me just go back in the presentation so we can get these up so we know what we're talking about. So the 400 South First Avenue, this one is close to what is Ace Hardware. It's kind of behind or east of the federal courthouse. It has 50 spaces. There's approximately 34 leases there now. I can tell you pre-COVID, this was fully leased. We would anticipate that it's gonna come closer to 50 or 100%, probably within the next 3 to 6 months. We would anticipate most of those leases coming back. That being said, they would be absorbed into the lot behind the Shrine, which is a block to the south, potentially the parking ramp near the bus depot, and the pavilion ramp, which is a block to the west. So that's where they would all go. We have plenty of capacity in the pavilion ramp to absorb them. It's running at about 50% on long-term contracts, and that's good. So what's different about that ramp, and The one consistent number we have is occupancy from year to year to year. When we talk about hourly customers increasing, the hourly usage of that ramp has shot through the roof. So we're looking at a way, how can we measure that a little better from an activity perspective? But I can tell you, we could absorb that entire lot into the top level, which is contract customers at the pavilion now. So that's not an issue. The other location is the 300 North Main Avenue lot. And that one is sitting at 83% leased. It was closer to 95 pre-COVID. And so where we would put those would be across the street to the pavilion, to the 8th and Dakota ramp, which is attached to City Center. That's currently 87% leased. We'd be able to absorb them into that facility due to the size and the ability to oversell. That facility is also expandable by one level if we ever needed to. But that's where they would all go, and we can do that pretty readily. Did I miss any numbers, questions?
No, the last one was just how we advertise private lots such as Washington Square and other public-private partnerships that have the utilization to use. I know they don't want signage on their buildings, but we've got to figure out a way that people know you can park there.
So we do have a map, and I'll double check it. We call it our visitors map that we created several years ago. It shows lots and ramps where parking is available. It shows lots and ramps where parking is available after 5 p.m. and on nights and weekends. I don't know if Washington Square is on there, and we typically have not advertised East Bank, but those are two things we can look at. I know a lot of the businesses do use that to put actually on their website or to share with people.
Thank you.
Counselor Sale.
Thank you. I believe these questions might be for you. One of the statements made by your team today was that these lots were bought with the intent to develop them. If they have not been bought with the intent to develop, if that's not in the ordinance, the spending ordinance or the resolution, I personally do not believe you can overcome the legal hurdle to declare it surplus. If it was bought for a parking lot, currently be used for a parking lot, I don't think it can be legally declared surplus. So, can you provide the council with the ordinances, the supplemental budgets, the resolutions that spent the money to buy these so that we have that document so we can assess whether or not it's going to be a surplus or not? You can get it to us whenever you can do that. My next question, if that is done, and we do get to the spot where we're considering a proposal, what means are you going to present to the council the proposal that the administration wants versus the proposals that you didn't want? We used to have an RFP where one of the council members would sit on that and we could ask them questions about, well, what did you turn down? Did you not like a Ferris wheel? Was it a water park? What did you turn down? What are you looking at? So I'm interested to say, now that we don't have that, what means are you going to provide that to the council so we can select what we think is the best proposal?
Well, I think with the RFP process that we had before, none of the proposals were, not all of the proposals were ever presented. There may have been a counselor that sat on the review panel, but the proposals that weren't selected were never presented in front of the city council. It was only the proposal that was selected that was brought forward. And ultimately, again, it was evaluated based on the criteria that was set forth in the RFP. What we've done as we've released property in the last couple years, so we've done this with our rail yard redevelopment property, as well as how we've identified this with our surface parking lots, is that there's a negotiated sale. That process is on the website. What we do for each of those is we identify the goals for those sites up front as when we list those properties. And then again, we are evaluating those from an administration standpoint based on those goals and objectives. And we are evaluating those to bring forward the best project that we think is suitable for redevelopment there. And so again, we're bringing that forward. I think, we're happy to have, some of those conversations with council about why we've selected the proposal we've selected. But we don't necessarily share the proposals that were not selected as part of that. And part of that is again, a part of just the process. And we created the new process based off comments that we've received over the years about the stringent requirements of an RFP as we've brought those forward. So again, this is a new process, but it's how we've been operating the rail yard. It's how it led to rail yard flats and the redevelopment there, and the future proposal for Sharapa 2. Again, and this is how we have the process set up currently for the redevelopment of the lots as well.
And I totally understand that, but at this point, I will tell you, I feel that's inadequate for informing the council. Yeah, let me go back to the golf course. And when you pick somebody for the golf course, there was an RFP. We felt that at that time, appropriate selection, but there was still a lot of mad people that somebody else was not picked. I don't want to have that happen again. So if the council is uninformed for what other options were out there, the last thing we need is we don't need that. So I would strongly urge that if we get to that point where we're looking at proposals, that we know everything that's out there. Because if one developer says I got shortchanged, or the other developer says, well, I asked to spend more money, but the city decided not to take that, that puts us in a very, very bad position. So somehow you have to increase your game and bring us more information when we get to that point. Because up to now, the council's had no input on what you're looking for, the administration's looking for in these lots. We really don't have the background enough to know you want to sell these lots, but we don't know how you acquired the lots. So there's a lot of questions yet to be answered before we get to the spot where we're going to develop. And a lot of this is great for the north end of downtown. What about the south end of downtown? Downtown's a big area when you're looking at all these parking spots. So as we go forward, I think you have to look at a smaller geographical area for parking, whether it be retail, whether it be residential, whether it be office, so that we know where all of these people are going. Because people in South Dakota and Sioux Falls, they don't want to walk 4 blocks from a parking ramp to their business, 4 blocks from a parking ramp to their home. So I've got a lot of questions yet, and I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councilor Selberg, but I just want to note for the council, I'll just look for any input. We are at 5:35. We still have to do public input after we conclude this, and we need to be done by 5:45 with an exec session to reset. So I'm just going to propose that we maybe just cancel going into exec session and just finish this discussion.
Is there a way that we can do exec session Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? I think it's that important. Exec sessions aren't generally just called because we're wishing somebody happy birthday. It's generally a big deal why we have them. And so if we can have them sometime this week, I think it's really important.
Okay, let's have that discussion offline. That's a good point.
No, I think we do try to wrap up this topic if we can today, because we obviously don't have adequate time for the exec session. Even if we're able to stop right now, we still have public input. So, and maybe look into the availability of members prior to next Tuesday.
Sure, sounds great. I just don't want to go into exec session and then just have to adjourn a minute later. So, okay, let's continue. Councilor Selberg.
All right, well, my question might be a little easier, so it'll be quicker here. When you're looking at COVID impacts, so meter usage right now is back to 85% of what it was for pre-COVID? And if I'm just making sure if I'm reading the presentation right, at one time was as low as 5% in April and May, is that right? Or am I getting categories crossed?
What I would say is those kind of approximate generalizations right there. So we're definitely above 85% in our core area. Like when we talk about like Phillips Avenue, where all of our retail and restaurant businesses are, we're exceeding that 85%. Where we're seeing it drop down a little below that is when you get outside and some of those businesses that have not returned yet. It's definitely not as busy. So it's spotty, but overall we're sitting around 85%, 80 to 85% is where I would say is.
And it was down to 5.
Yeah, we were down to about 10 to 15. Okay. So one of our locations, just as a judge of like how things look, the pavilion ramp, which takes a lot of hourly customers to restaurants, bars, and the pavilion for activities, we were down to 5% in 1 month.
Wow, okay. Well, I'd maybe be curious to see kind of the graph sometime on how that's climbed over the last few months. So, but
and we're tracking that. Sure. We can provide it. We've got a spreadsheet where it's already done.
Okay,
so
great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'll be quick because I have a statement.
Please.
I wanted to weigh in on the point that I can't talk for the rest of the council, but what I'm hearing today, we're not interested in marketing these 2 lots. We're interested in taking care of the big gray lump that we have a problem with downtown. There are other pieces of property on North Phillips by Southeastern Behavioral that's also a surface lot that needs to be there. There are other 2 messages, I guess you can take away as far as I'm concerned. One, we're not interested in marketing these lots. That's not a priority for us. And the other is that something has to be done and the public needs to be updated on what's going on. And the priority is different. And that we're not being included as a council in what's going on. Don't bring us stuff that's already done. And you're not doing a good job right now doing that. Thank you.
Councillor Kiley.
I'll try to make it quick. I think we do come down to a question, you know, is it the chicken or the egg scenario? Do we, in this case, you know, which should come first, negotiations for the space with developers or the declaration that the property is surplus? I think that's probably something that's coming out of this discussion as well, too. Regarding the parking board members, I'm curious as to why do we at least have one member outside the downtown parking that can be a member of that board? Because after all, we do have people from all stretches of the city, all areas of the city that utilize downtown. So shouldn't they be represented on that board?
The way the ordinances are written, and they predate me, it's been this way a long time, doesn't mean it can't change. I'd welcome a change. But yes, they have to have a tie to downtown. It's very specific in how that board and ordinance is written.
So that's in ordinance, so that's
Yes.
something that we could look at potentially changing that.
Absolutely, and if, as a group, the council decided they wanted to do that, I mean, if it was 1 or 2 members, I think it'd be more than welcome, because it does make sense that we would have people with a more of an outside perspective.
Okay. And Matt, tongue in cheek, maybe we should just solicit from the individuals that are heavy on the fine area that they might have a greater interest in serving on the board. Thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing none, I guess I would just say for myself that I do consider it a priority, and I'm big on walkability and activating downtown, and you have precious space and you want to get rid of parking ramps and turn them into or lots, I'm sorry, get rid of lots and get ramps so that you have more economic development and more density downtown, because that makes our parking enterprise healthier and it makes our sales tax healthier and it makes downtown businesses healthier. So I would encourage the administration to maybe reset, have a discussion with individual councilors and see where people are at. But I don't know that you have, and in my particular case, I am interested. I can't speak for the rest of the council. Okay, with that, we are going to move to public input. Anyone who wants to talk to public input? Up to 5 minutes. Welcome.
Scott Harrisman, Sioux Falls. I want to start out with congratulating whoever accomplished a great accomplishment. I was watching the video earlier and it was working. I saw it on my phone and on my computer. It's been over a month since that's happened. So congratulations. I don't know who's responsible for that, but good job. Here's another prime example of why we shouldn't have changed the city council meeting to 7 o'clock. You guys aren't going to be able to have your executive session. You're not going to be able to hear all the questions you could from the council because we switched the meeting to 6 o'clock on the city council. I've also been hearing there's been a lot of informational presentations that have been canceled because we don't have the time to do them. You need to move the meeting back to 7 o'clock, and at that same meeting, when you do that, you need to put public input at the beginning. I can also tell you why we don't hear from advisory boards anymore. Because open government is not a priority of this administration. In fact, it's the exact opposite. There's a hate fest of transparency and open government going on. They're using COVID as an excuse. Oh, we can't meet because of COVID. You know how long people have been meeting over the internet? 20 years. Zoom wasn't created last year, folks. It's been around for a long time. As for the financial report, you know what I got out of that? That we are being taxed to the hilt from this city. I could talk about county and I could talk about school district. They're atrocious also. I think we need a tax cut. I believe that we should cut the property tax for the city, and I believe that we should cut the second penny to a half a penny. I believe we're being incredibly overtaxed. I have watched this city for 20 years, and this budget is atrocious. And I don't know what we're getting for it. The core of our city is crumbling. I've told you this before. Just drive around, look around the core. That's where all the affordable housing is, and now we don't have anything. I get 2 letters a week for somebody wanting to buy my ramshackle house. I get phone calls for somebody wanting to buy my house. I mean, when are we going to spend money on the infrastructure of the core of the city? As for the parking thing, I had to chuckle about the fact that in 2035, I guess we're planning this far ahead for parking, which I don't believe, that we're going to need another 2,000 parking spots. Do you think people are going to be driving cars in 2035? Well, maybe, but they ain't going to be driving them. People are going to be taking self-driving cars everywhere. Most people probably won't even own cars. Most people will probably convert their garages into, man caves, because they ain't going to have cars. That's looking ahead to the future. That's what we should be looking at. We should be looking at a way of making downtown more walkable. You know what I've been seeing? And this has really been surprising me. I bought an electric scooter last year, but it's a one that you drive on the street. It's like a moped. It'll do 35 miles an hour. But you know what I've been seeing a lot of? People have been riding the electric two-wheel ones. And I mean a lot of people. I think people, when they get into a downtown area or something like that, or in a denser area, we just ain't gonna see cars anymore. It's just not, it's a thing that's gonna go away. And in 2035, we're talking about how we need more spaces for cars. I know I'm not trying to sound like George Jetson here, but you ain't gonna see cars going up and down Phillips Avenue in 2035. You just aren't. It probably won't even be a road there anymore. We need to not only get our advisory boards to meet so we can hear from other people, we need to plan ahead for the future, and we need to be looking towards the future and not backwards. We were told that we needed 5G all over downtown. Well, I know the real reason why we got it, because Johnny Thune gets a lot of money from the big shots in the tech industry. But we needed it for autonomous vehicles. So we got all this 5G, but we need more parking for gasoline combustion engine vehicles. And Pat is right. That piece of crap over here, big chunk of cement, needs to be fixed as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Others for public input? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.